mother, wife,
Air Force veteran,
gun rights advocate.
This is Stacy on the Right. Here's your host, Stacy Washington.
Welcome back to Stacy on the Right here on SiriusXM. So glad to be with you this evening. Welcoming into the show, Sarah Montalbano. She is an education policy analyst for the Alaska Policy Forum, visiting fellow at the Independent Women's Forum, and Northwest Regional Leader for Young Voices. Sarah, thanks for your time tonight.
Hello, Stacy. Thanks for having me.
So, yes, I'm glad you're here. We have environmentalists and their work. It seems never ending. They don't take a lot of rest or time off from their environmentalism. And now they're having an effect on actual economic growth in rural America.
Absolutely, Stacy. I'm from Alaska, of course, and it's an issue that hits our state particularly hard.
So what part of Alaska are you from?
Wasilla, Alaska, about 45 minutes north of Anchorage. You probably remember it, though, as the place Sarah Palin is from.
Actually, we know it well. My husband has a cousin who lives right down the street from Sarah Palin. Literally.
Wow, that's delightful.
A few minutes away. So we actually drove by the main road that leads up to her house, and she pointed it out to us. She's like, I know you guys are Republicans, and you might be interested to know that Sarah Palin lives just up that road. And I was like, oh my gosh. Of course, we did not drive up there. I understand she has a lot of, security issues, but it was really cool. Alaska, I've been there actually twice. And both times to Anchorage, and it's a beautiful place. It's unbelievable. You feel like you're stepping into like slash a movie, and also it's kind of like a dream because everything there is so outsized. You feel so tiny coming out of the airport and seeing the huge mountain just over the way there, it's literally not just over the way, but it's so big it looks like it's right there. So that's fascinating because when you talk about rural America, most people don't think about Alaska as having huge rural areas, but it does.
Absolutely. So much of Alaska is rural, and so much of it is owned by federal or state land. There's only a tiny fraction of the state that's owned by private individuals. So I find it a huge privilege to have grown up there. But, investment and development are kind of difficult in Alaska, too.
Yeah. So with the government being, hugely involved in anything, it makes the economic aspects of it very fraught. And then if you mix in environmentalism, which is kind of something that doesn't make sense, it's almost so. I don't want to say it's like a religion because to me, Christianity makes a whole lot of sense. But there are people who find Christianity mystifying and baffling and completely incomprehensible. And I feel like that's the same feeling that we have about a lot of the work that environmentalists engage in because there's no proof in any of it. I've never had an environmentalist actually tell me or show me with charts, graphs, information, links, data of any sort, how their work actually improves the lives of Americans or the environment at this point, because they've changed so much from their original, they used to actually say, we're cleaning up this ocean, we're cleaning up this neighborhood. There's none of that left.
I would say so. And I think, one of the biggest problems about that is that these environmentalists are not like you and me. They've never gone to Alaska. They've never seen the state and seen how people can actually be responsible with development, hand-in-hand development and conservation. And these decisions about energy and the environment, really ought to be decided by the citizens and residents of the states affected by it, not, activists elsewhere, not unaccountable bureaucrats in D.C. That's really how I feel about it. It's a really difficult problem, but it's one that needs to be solved at the local level.
So this is something that we're seeing a lot in not just Alaska, but states like Maine. The Washington Examiner article by Roy Matthews details how Maine has the highest median age in the country and how they're struggling to get young people to fill existing jobs. So unlike the area that we currently live in here in St. Louis County, we call it a boomerang suburb because kids go away to college. They go far-flung all over the place to college, some even abroad. And then within 5 years of graduation, they're back here living within 20 minutes of wherever they grew up or where their parents currently live. And they're taking advantage of the lower cost of living, cheaper median home price. And, of course, there's also just being near family. It helps with babysitting when you want to start a family and things like that. But Maine doesn't have that going on. And then on top of all of that, you have the industries that they're most known for. The most prevalent industries there are blueberry, logging, lobster. These are not year-round things, so Mainers have to supplement their income through other means. These are all things that push young people not to return to Maine. But where does the environmental lobby kind of kick in to exacerbate that problem?
I think the environmental lobby ends up coming into this by not understanding local economies, because Alaska is largely the same. We have a very strong fishing and tourism industry, but those are really only active in the summers. And so we need kind of oil and gas to keep things up otherwise. And I think it's really interesting that you bring Roy's article into this, because it's an interesting parallel, because Alaska is still a young state, but we're losing people too. I mean, environmentalism is making it impossible to actually have investors invest long-term in the state. And I think, Maine is seeing a lot of the same thing, where you aren't going to pass down your lobster boat to your child and expect them to stay here when it's so uncertain whether this industry is even going to continue to be a thing, with, vast areas of the Gulf of Maine, being protected for endangered white whales and, a whole bunch of boating restrictions and speed issues. So I think there's a lot of parallels to draw here, and environmentalism is making it worse.
Worse, and also putting it in a place where, so once environmentalists get involved, and this is just my take on it when I watch the after effects of environmentalists, it seems as if once they get involved, then things become so complex and so regulated and so kind of terrible to deal with that you end up with a situation in which people kind of detach and throw their hands up and just kind of let go.
I would say so. And I'll tell you a very brief story about the Pebble Mine. And you can have whatever feelings you have about the Pebble Mine. I have no position on it, on its merits. But, I remember as a kid seeing the controversy start around Pebble Mine. I was, in middle school when all of this was really gearing up. And, it's still an ongoing issue. There's just no certainty whatsoever for investors, for, people to actually work in the state. And it gets so cumbersome that people just give up. The litigation's ongoing by the state of Alaska, but, it's a decade is too long for people to try and hold these investments and to continue to make this happen. It's really a war of attrition that environmentalists like to play with, just crazy litigation and making the government redo a bunch of environmental impact statements and, various hostile strategies to try and stop these things from happening. In that process, they're doing what they can to just slow things down.
Okay, so what are the action items for listeners who are just as frustrated as you and I are over the way that these people, they just take anything great and they ruin it? And if they're left to their own devices, like there's nothing left, nothing that you originally would have thought. And I just hate to see them operating in Alaska or Maine or really any U.S. state, because every one of our U.S. states is gorgeous and has its own, beautiful attributes that we can all enjoy. So what would you tell our listeners that they should do?
That's a great question. One of the things I would say is to remember that conservation doesn't mean that there needs to be zero development or anything like that. Take these arguments head on and think about them critically, and think about, the precedent it's setting for all of these different projects. The second thing I would say, and this is kind of obvious, but vote whenever you're given an opportunity on these projects. Try to elect the people or approve the ballot measures that are going to do what you want for the environment. And, to continue to try to foster, the economy that you want to see in your state, because it's very easy to leave, to go elsewhere, to find an economy, a state that is doing better, that isn't under such attack. But we lose the specialness of Maine and Alaska and all of our states when we hand them over. We need to think about how we can continue to contribute to these debates and to be the kind of voice of reason in our own states and communities.
the thing that we want is to make great decisions for the environment, to protect the environment, but to also leave it open for development and to trust the people who are closest to it to take care of it and to manage it instead of having the government in charge of everything, and especially a government that in Alaska's case, it's almost a world away in Washington, D.C.
I agree completely.
I'm just thinking of how long it took us to get there. We were flying from right here in Missouri. So we're in the middle of the country, and we flew to Seattle, Washington. And then from there, we took a direct flight into Anchorage. And it was, first of all, an unbelievably breathtaking trip. You know, once you get up into the Pacific Northwest and then you start going, you know, further and further up, and then you start to see glaciers. I mean, you start to see, I saw things I'd never seen from a plane window before, and I've been all over the world. And so I was like, what am I looking at? My husband's like, yep, this is the way it is flying back and forth from here. It's unreal. So, you know, it takes a long time. It feels like you're like, where am I going exactly? So, certainly the people who are making decisions about what happens in Alaska should at least have been there. I'd say maybe 10 times. I think twice isn't even enough. I've been twice. I don't think that's enough. I think you need to really have been in Alaska and talk to Alaskans and understand how they live and how they think before you can make those kinds of choices for them.
I agree completely, and I'm so glad you enjoyed your trip. It is a long one, of course, from anywhere in the United States, but you really need to understand how Alaskans think and how our economy is built too. It's just not realistic to say that we're going to survive off of fishing and tourism alone. You know, we need these other industries and we need to foster these things. And, a quarter of Alaskans, are employed in oil and gas. It's such a huge industry, and all of these people would lose their livelihoods if environmentalists got their way and treated Alaska like it's only a wildlife preserve.
Oh, there's so much more to it than wildlife. There's so many different things to see there. And it's so in the developed areas, it's very developed. And in the wilder areas, It's very wild and natural. It's like all of the extremes in one state that's enormous and way too big for you to, you can't just explore it. Like Missouri, you can drive from one side to the other in under 4 hours, all the way across the state. Now, if you want to go diagonally, it'll take a lot longer. But if you're just getting on Highway 70 or 44 and going across, it only takes about 3.5, 4 hours to do that. That's not even close in Alaska. You know what I mean? Like thinking of it scale wise, you can't hardly get anywhere in Alaska in 3.5 to 4 hours. So I highly recommend it. If you can get a chance to go up there, go and see it for yourself. It's almost like your whole brain is being rearranged as you're looking around at everything because the scale is so off the charts. I'm so glad you joined us tonight to talk about this. I hope that we can have you back again, especially not just on environmental issues, but anything having to do with the economy and all of those types of areas in which you have expertise. We really appreciate your time tonight.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure.
All right. Wonderful to have Sarah Montalbano here from IWF. You know how we love the women at IWF. They're amazing. You can find her in our Twitter feed. We tweeted her this evening. Check her out. Follow her. Follow at IWF as well. Let's take the break here. When we get back, would you like to talk about any of the candidates who'll be debating tomorrow night? I know a lot of people have strong feelings about Pence and Haley and Vivek, and there's so many of them. What about Tim Scott? Do you think he's going to show out tomorrow night? Will he actually make a dent in people's mental thought processes? You know who's trending on Twitter right now? Again, Vivek. He's trending again because of his appearance on CNN. So 866-957-2874, 866-95-PATRIOT.